Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into the winter fuel payment. It's always a big topic, especially as we think about colder weather. And you, our listener, sent us a really interesting piece, Winter Fuel Payment Policy Challenges. It really digs into the recent political chat and, where things might be heading for this key support for pensioners. So our mission really is to unpack all that complexity. What could these changes actually mean for pensioners? The big question seems to be, how do you balance supporting pensioners, especially vulnerable ones, with, well, the state of public finances?
Exactly. The winter fuel payment, it seems simple on the surface, doesn't it? But it really touches on big things: social welfare, government spending,
Yeah.
how you actually run these policies day to day. And yeah, the info you shared gives a great snapshot of the current thinking and the different paths they're considering.
Okay, let's break it down then. The source material kicks off looking at FIM when some key things are said. You have the Prime Minister saying he wanted more pensioners to get the WFP. Sounds positive, but no real specifics.
Hmm, quite vague. And that was actually after Rachel Reeves had already floated the idea of means testing it, way back in July.
Right, July. Why so early? And when we say means testing, just to be clear, that's basically checking pensioners' income, maybe assets too, to see if they qualify. Yeah.
Precisely. And the source suggests that a big reason for mentioning it back then was, well, the immediate money situation. They were talking about this estimated 22 billion pound or black hole in the finances. So the thinking was perhaps looking at WFP savings early could help plug that gap within the current financial year.
Oh, okay. Pressure to find savings quickly. Although the source does say, with hindsight, maybe waiting until the budget would have been politically less bumpy.
Could well be.
Yeah.
Then fast forward, what, 10 months or so? And Sir Keir Starmer sort of shifts position again on the WFP. So just the details won't come into the budget now. It does feel like it's being kicked down the road a bit.
Yeah, a definite shift. And Angela Rayner then seemed to confirm that, didn't she? Saying more info needs a proper fiscal event and crucially no promise of changes for this coming winter.
Absolutely. And that distinction is important, as the source points out. The spending review June 11th, that's more about carving up the existing pie, no new tax measures usually. A full fiscal event is where you get the big tax and spend decisions. So WFP changes would likely need that.
Right, so spending review gives us clues maybe, but the real WFP details might be later. Okay, so that leads us nicely into the actual ideas for reform. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS, they've crunched some numbers and options.
They certainly have. And it's helpful because they lay out a real spectrum of possibilities. At one end, you've got it's going back to full universality. Basically, everyone who gets it now keeps getting it. The price tag for that, according to the source, about 1.5 billion pounds a year.
Okay, simple to understand, but yeah, a hefty cost.
Yeah.
What else did the IFS look at?
Well, another thought was making pension credit more generous. Pension credit, just as a reminder for listeners, is the top-up for pensioners on low incomes. The logic is, if you make more people eligible for pension credit, they automatically qualify for the WFP too. But as the source notes, that obviously pushes up the cost of pension credit itself.
Right, a knock-on effect there. Interesting. They also talked about moving the WFP from being a household payment to an individual one. That sounds quite fundamental.
It really is. The main advantage the IFS sees is it could allow for individual means testing, maybe using existing income tax records, which could be, well, more targeted. The big potential downside, though, is the cost. If you pay per person, couples would suddenly get double the amount compared to now.
Wow, okay. That's a huge financial implication. Suddenly makes universality look less expensive in some ways. What other targeting ideas did the IFS explore?
They also suggested extending eligibility to people on other means-tested benefits, things like housing benefit, and maybe possibly to everyone getting disability benefits, at least for a while, until those benefits perhaps change criteria. So using existing gateways, essentially, to target the WFP.
Okay, and then the council tax band idea. Using bands A to C, they suggested. We saw something similar with the energy bills rebate, didn't we?
Exactly. The thinking is council tax bands are a readily available, if imperfect, proxy for household wealth. But yeah, it's not foolproof. You'll always get edge cases, people in lower bands who aren't struggling, and
Yeah.
maybe people in higher bands who are. It's a bit rough and ready.
Right. Now, this next bit feels particularly tricky, the clawback option, using the high-income child benefit charge, the HICBC, as a sort of model. The IFS didn't sound too keen, but it's been talked about.
Yes, this idea of getting the WFP back from higher income pensioners. The source highlights some media chat suggesting this might just focus on higher and additional rate taxpayers, but this is where the numbers get really interesting. Well, according to a Freedom of Information response that Steve Webb at LCP got hold of, cited in the source, if you only exclude higher and additional rate taxpayers, the saving in 2025-26 would only be around 150 million.
Just 150 million? That
hmm
seems tiny compared to the other figures we've talked about, like the 1.5 billion saving if you removed it from, what, 10.5 million pensioners.
Exactly. It puts it into perspective. You're talking about a huge administrative effort, potentially, for a relatively small saving. The source even jokes about HMRC having to create a HIWFPC, a high-income winter fuel payment charge. Is setting all that up really worth it for 150 million?
You have to question the cost benefit there. And the source mentions HMRC's experience with the actual HICBC.
Yeah, that brought in 525 million from about 440,000 taxpayers in 22-23. A much bigger return for the admin involved, arguably. Plus, you run into the same old problems. WFP is often based on the household or couple.
But income tax is individual. That HICBC complexity all over again.
Precisely. And the source also makes the very good point that loads of higher rate tax-paying pensioners don't do self-assessment tax returns. So how do you even catch them?
Another administrative nightmare, potentially. Especially as HMRC wants fewer people doing self-assessment, not more.
Exactly. Adding a new reason seems to go against the grain of simplifying tax administration.
Okay, so let's just pull that together. We've looked at the initial announcements, the political back and forth, Starmer's U-turn, then the IFS options, universality, boosting pension credit, individual payments, linking to other benefits, council tax bans. Quite the menu. And finally, this clawback idea, which seems popular in headlines but maybe less practical and offers smaller savings than you might think. It's definitely not simple, is it? Lots of moving parts.
Not at all. And the core issue really is that tension, isn't it? How do you target support effectively to those who genuinely need it most, without creating a system that's incredibly complex, expensive to run, or full of anomalies? Every single option has its own set of pros, cons, and, frankly, trade-offs.
Absolutely. So that leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Thinking about everything we've discussed, all the different ways forward, the costs, the complexities, the fairness arguments, what single factor do you think should be the absolute top priority when deciding what happens next with the winter fuel payment? Is it purely about saving government money? Is it about making it simple, easy to manage? Or is the most important thing ensuring that the most vulnerable pensioners definitely get that help, even if the system isn't perfectly targeted or costs a bit more overall? It's a tough one, a real puzzle with big consequences for many people.